Hello everyone. Welcome to an early access review of Salt. Salt is an open world exploration and adventure game. It also has some survival elements. Those are kind of minor. However, the focus is really on the exploration and adventure elements, not so much the survival elements. When you start a new game in Salt, you're going to wake up on an island with a limited amount of inventory and a vague idea of what you need to do. You'll discover a raft that needs to be repaired, and you'll set about looking around the island trying to scavenge materials in order to repair that raft. From the very moment you start the game, the sense of vastness and basically possibility is overwhelming. As you're collecting the materials to build your raft, you see other islands off in the distance, lots of them. And you can't help but feel a pull to go explore those islands and see what mysteries they may hold. As you start the game, you're actually given some books and other information that kind of give a vague idea of what may be out there on those islands. And I think that really amplifies that desire to go out there and explore and just see what's out there. So that feeling, that vibe, you can only really get out of fairly well put together open world games. That desire to explore is very much a part of Salt. In fact, that's probably the game's most defining characteristic, is how well it does exploration. How completely motivated it can make a player to just go out and see the world. And I think that's actually what Salt does very, very well, and that's probably where it's the most successful. Like many other open world games, Salt has a crafting system. I think the crafting system does just enough to keep you interested without feeling overwhelming. The crafting itself doesn't feel like too much work, although scavenging for materials can sometimes feel like a little too much work. It can feel like you're scavenging for materials for quite a long time in order to make certain items. However, those items I think are really meant to take quite a long time to make. You will have to go across several islands and gather lots of different materials, some rare materials, to make certain items. However, when you make those items, it is pretty rewarding, and I feel like the crafting system just overall does exactly what it needs to do without doing too much, without requiring too much of your time. As you're exploring the world of Salt, you're going to find quests. These quests typically take the form of an NPC that's going to give you some vague information on something they want, or a book that's going to tell you to go do something. The details you're given are very minimal and require quite a bit of work on your part to figure out what exactly you need to go do and where it's at. The quest system isn't going to be for everyone, but it is very rewarding, and it is made for people who want to kind of figure it out on their own. People that don't need quest markers and the game telling you where to go. This is very much a figure it out on your own kind of situation. That's also true for the game's map system. The map system is basically you're given a map and you fill it out on your own. For the most part, I found that it worked pretty well, and I kind of liked having to deal with that on my own. I thought that was fine. However, the interface for the map I felt like was a little clunky and could have been done a little bit better. I also felt like the map could have been a little larger, although that actually could be something that you get as you progress through the game. Also, if I'm being honest, I would like it to fill out the land masses on the map itself as I discover them, and then I can just enter in information on what's on that island. However, other than those minor complaints, the map system actually does work pretty well, and it is pretty rewarding to fill out your own map and do all of that yourself. One other thing I want to mention about this game is how relaxing it can be. This is definitely one of those games that you can kind of just sit back in a chair after a long day, and it really helps you just relieve stress, just relax, and kind of sail around the ocean. It's a very calming experience, and I just found it to be great after a long day or something like that. So I really want to mention it because sometimes I know I'm looking for a game like that, and I'm sure other people are as well, and this can definitely deliver that. It doesn't always deliver that because there are other activities you can do that require a little more attention, a little more effort. However, it definitely can be that relaxing game as well. I will say, though, that one man's relaxing is another man's slow. For some people, this game will be slow rather than relaxing, and I can definitely see that point of view. For some people, the distance you're going to be traveling and how slow it can be on a sailboat to get there, and also how much time you're going to spend scavenging materials and things like that, it's not going to be for everyone. So, as I said, for some people this game may be slow. Other people are going to find this to be very relaxing and a very enjoyable experience. So keep that in mind. While the game succeeds in many areas, I don't really feel like combat is one of them. The combat system is very basic. Most weapons have a main attack and then a secondary attack, which is basically just you charging up a swing. With melee weapons, you can also block. However, a lot of times your best bet is just to attack, rather than trying to attack and then block and then attack again. A lot of times the damage that it reduces isn't enough to justify stopping your attacks to do that. You can engage in ranged combat, and I actually spent a lot of time doing so. In fact, there were many harder enemies that I basically just hid behind stuff, shooting them with my bow, trying to drop their health enough to then go and melee them. And while it worked, it wasn't particularly interesting. In fact, with many enemies, I basically just sat at a distance or sat on my ship, shot them from my ship, and just dodged any ranged attacks they may have, and waited until they died and then collected loot. So I really wish that the block system was a little more interesting, which would then make you probably use melee combat a little better. I feel like block could actually reduce more of the damage, and that may make it a little more interesting, but basically these enemies are just on swing timers, and they're just doing the same attack over and over again at set intervals, and it's just not particularly interesting. So I feel like combat is one area they could really improve quite a bit on, but the rest of the game is so good despite that I don't really feel like it's bringing it down too much. Just don't expect a whole lot of combat from this game. That's not what this game is about. This game's really about exploration. Combat is kind of an extra. As usual, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on graphics. I will say these are done pretty well for what they are. However, just keep in mind these are very simple graphics. You can actually see even when you install the game and it's only around 100 megs, there's not a whole lot to this game. So graphically, it's done well with what they were working with, but it's very simple. In particular, the character models really stand out, really the weapon models too, as being very simplistic. However, that's not a huge issue in a game like this, I don't think, but it is something to keep in mind. I will say, though, for as simple as the game's graphics are, I feel like it should run a little better than it did. I, most of the time, was not quite at 60 frames per second. I don't have the best PC in the world. However, I can run a lot of stuff that requires a whole lot more than this, and I feel like it just isn't quite running as well as it really should be for what it is. But it didn't run badly for me. It just didn't run particularly great. So because this is an early access game, I kind of want to talk a little bit about the state of the game. During my 13 hours with the game, I experienced one hard crash. I also ran into a few bugs. Most of them were not game-breaking in the least. However, I did have one bug that appeared several times that basically just launched me up into the air. For the most part, I was usually at sea when it happened, so I landed either on my ship or in the water, but it was kind of an amusing bug, and it happened several times. It usually had something to do, I think, with two ships kind of colliding. I think some of the collision detection just caused me to fly up into the air. There were also some issues with ships kind of running through each other and things like that. So there are a few bugs, there are a few oddities, things that could use some polish, but overall, the game is in pretty good shape. Overall, I would say for an early access game, this is a very complete experience. You're not getting a game that needs a ton of work in order to be playable. This is a very playable game at this point. It actually offers a whole lot of content, and so far with the 13 hours I've put into the game, while I feel like I definitely have seen enough of the game to understand what it is and what it's trying to do, in some ways, I feel like I've only just scratched the surface of what's out there. I feel like there's a whole lot more to explore, a whole lot more to see, many more quests to do, so there's definitely a lot of content in this game. This game has actually been fairly difficult to score. I've jumped back and forth between a 7 and an 8 several times for various reasons. On one hand, I feel like this game almost fully succeeds in everything it sets out to do other than probably the combat. However, I'm not sure it actually does enough to justify an 8. So in this situation, this is one of those times I'm going to use a 0.5. I don't think it does quite enough to deserve an 8. However, it does so many things well that giving it a 7 doesn't feel right either. So I'm settling on a 7.5. I found the game's exploration to be absolutely fantastic. It's actually a surprisingly deep game. I didn't really expect it to be a very deep game when I started playing. However, with the crafting system and the exploration and some of the quest lines you discover, there's actually a lot to this. As I mentioned, it can also be a very relaxing game. It's definitely one of those games that you can play after a long day and just kind of zone out when you want to. It's also a very rewarding game. It can require a lot of effort, however, that makes the reward just that much better. However, the game does have some issues. Mostly, it's the combat. The combat is just basic and boring. I really didn't enjoy doing it. It could have almost not even been in the game, and I would have been just as happy. It can also be kind of a slow game. For me, that was more relaxing than an issue. However, especially over a period of probably 30 or 40 hours, I could see where this would get kind of slow, just slowly traveling from island to island, gathering resources and things like that. So, it could be a slow game. Also, I noticed that some islands kind of feel barren. There's not a whole lot on any of these islands, however, some of them are literally just a few resources scattered across the island, and that's basically it. And I felt like some of the distribution, even for a procedurally generated game, which this is, I feel like the distribution needed to be adjusted on some islands because it just didn't feel like there was a lot there. So as far as a high-end score, what some people may actually get out of this game, I don't think it's much higher than what I gave it, but for some people this is probably closer to an 8. The pirate and nautical theme especially is going to really hit home for a lot of people. Also, as I said, it's a very relaxing experience. There's times where you can just cruise around and relax, and for some people I know that's what they're looking for, and this is definitely one of those games. As far as a low-end score, I'm going to say it's probably closer to a 5 out of 10 for some. It can be very slow. That is what makes it relaxing, but for some people, this is just going to be too slow. It's also got some very simple graphics that a lot of people are going to dislike, and the game also gives you very little guidance or assistance. For the most part, you're figuring out most things on your own. When you get a quest, you're usually just given a vague idea of what you need to go do, and you have to figure out all the rest. You have to plot all the points on your map. You have to do a lot of things manually that in a lot of games are handled automatically, and that can be time consuming and halt your progress a little bit, so particularly people who are short on time, they may find that this is just too slow for them. Regardless, this is definitely a very good early access game. This is exactly what you want to see out of an early access title. The game is stable, it plays well, it offers a lot of content and a very complete experience, so if you're playing an early access game, this is exactly the kind of early access game you want to play. So that's all I've got. If you like the video, maybe subscribe, maybe give it a thumbs up. If you dislike the video, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, you can let me know in the comments below what you thought, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.